Imagine working your entire life, day in and day out, believing that one day you'll finally rest. You dream of long mornings with coffee, trips you've postponed for decades, and the freedom to live life on your terms. Now imagine reaching that day, and realizing it's nothing like you planned. Your savings aren't enough. Social Security barely covers your rent. And suddenly, the golden years you envisioned are slipping through your fingers. This isn't a story about someone else, it's the reality for millions of Americans. Before we dive deeper into the realities of retirement, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the truths that affect our lives and our future. By subscribing, you'll stay informed and better prepared to face the challenges ahead. For the Johnsons, a family of 4 living in suburban Ohio, this harsh reality was slowly creeping into their lives. Karen Johnson, 58, had spent over 3 decades working as a nurse at a local hospital. Her husband, Mark, 60, had been a high school teacher, dedicated to shaping young minds, often taking extra shifts just to make ends meet. Their children, Emily, 32, and Daniel, 29, had recently started families of their own, adding the subtle pressure of legacy and financial guidance onto their parents. The Johnsons, like so many Americans, had believed that steady work, careful budgeting, and modest investments would lead them to a comfortable retirement. Yet, the numbers told a different story. Karen's 401k, accumulated through years of diligent contributions, barely reached 6 figures. Mark's pension was modest, adjusted every year but failing to keep pace with inflation. Even combined, their assets would cover basic expenses for only a decade if health issues or unexpected emergencies arose. The reality of retirement in America is more than just an abstract economic problem, it is a psychological weight that seeps into every decision. Studies show that nearly 60% of Americans aged 55 and older have less than $50,000 in retirement savings. For families like the Johnsons, this data is not just a statistic, it's the backdrop to nightly conversations at the kitchen table, weighing bills against potential medical costs, debating whether to downsize their home or postpone travel plans that once seemed guaranteed. Mark had always been pragmatic. He had grown up during the late 1970s, witnessing the aftermath of economic recessions and the volatile shifts in the job market. "We need to be prepared," he would say, his voice a mixture of concern and exhaustion. Yet, even with foresight, preparation often felt insufficient. Inflation, stagnant wages, and the rising cost of healthcare had a sneaky way of eroding years of careful planning. Karen, on the other hand, carried a quiet frustration. She had dedicated her life to caring for others, often sacrificing her own financial security for the well-being of patients and family. Now, as she examined bank statements and investment accounts late at night, the numbers seemed to mock her diligence. She knew that the American dream, owning a home, securing education for children, enjoying retirement without constant financial stress, was slipping into a myth for people like them. In their neighborhood, similar stories unfolded. The Thompsons, next door, had recently sold their home to move into a smaller apartment, citing medical expenses and mounting credit card debt. Across town, the Millers had begun part-time consulting work well into their 70s, unwilling to rely solely on Social Security. For the Johnsons, these examples were sobering reminders that retirement was no longer a guaranteed period of peace but a precarious balancing act between survival and hope. Culturally, America has long romanticized retirement as a reward for hard work, a golden phase of life where one can finally step back and enjoy the fruits of decades of labor. Yet, historically, this ideal has always been tied to economic and social structures that favor accumulation of wealth. The mid-20th century saw pensions and defined benefit plans as the norm, promising security for the elderly. Over the decades, the shift to defined contribution plans, such as 401(k)s, placed the burden of risk squarely on individuals. For families like the Johnsons, this structural change meant that decades of careful work could still leave them vulnerable to market fluctuations, inflation, and healthcare crises. Psychologically, the uncertainty gnawed at them. Sleep became fragmented with worry about long-term care, medical emergencies, and whether their children would need financial support. Anthropologically, retirement patterns in the U.S. reflect a tension between independence and community reliance. Americans are expected to be self-sufficient, yet the social safety nets are increasingly insufficient. Karen and Mark often wondered how previous generations, with smaller expectations and different economic landscapes, managed this transition, and whether their sacrifices would ever truly pay off. One crisp autumn evening, as Karen sipped her tea by the living room window, she watched the neighborhood children play. The sight was bittersweet. Emily's toddler laughed as he ran across the lawn, a sound that reminded Karen of simpler times, yet also highlighted the weight of responsibility she still bore. Mark joined her, a quiet tension lingering between them. "Do you think we'll ever get there?" he asked, his eyes reflecting both hope and anxiety. "Get where?" Karen replied softly. "A place where we're not constantly worrying about money." This conversation, though intimate, mirrored a national crisis. Millions of Americans face the reality that retirement is no longer a guaranteed period of comfort but a phase fraught with uncertainty. Healthcare costs, social security limitations, and the erosion of traditional pension systems contribute to a landscape where even disciplined savers find themselves exposed. Yet, within this struggle, the Johnsons also embodied resilience. They began exploring alternative strategies, downsizing their home, consulting with financial planners, and educating their children about money management. Each step was a negotiation between the life they hoped for and the reality they faced. They read articles on economic trends, watched documentaries, and attended local seminars on retirement planning. Every action was a small assertion of control in a system that often felt overwhelmingly stacked against them. By the time winter arrived, the Johnsons had gained a measure of clarity. While the path ahead remained uncertain, they recognized the importance of planning, adaptation, and candid conversations about financial reality. The golden years might not resemble the idyllic visions of their youth, but through careful navigation, they could still carve out a meaningful and secure future. In exploring the Johnson story, we begin to uncover the larger truths about why Americans can't retire comfortably. Their experiences reflect a confluence of economic structures, historical shifts in retirement planning, and the psychological weight of financial uncertainty. The journey ahead will take us deeper into these realities, examining the policies, cultural expectations, and personal decisions that shape the American retirement experience. Winter settled over Ohio, and the Johnsons' modest home seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of financial uncertainty pressed against the walls. The holidays had passed, leaving behind the residual joy of family gatherings but also a lingering anxiety about bills, health insurance premiums, and the ever-looming specter of unexpected expenses. For Karen, the nights were the hardest. She would lie awake, calculating costs in her mind, imagining what would happen if Mark fell ill or if a major repair drained their savings. Mark, meanwhile, tried to focus on practical steps. He had met with their financial advisor, a man named Paul Hawkins, who had a calm demeanor and a meticulous approach to numbers. "Your portfolio is solid for now," Paul said, spreading charts and statements across the small desk in his office. "But the market is volatile. Healthcare costs are climbing faster than inflation, and Social Security alone won't sustain your lifestyle." His words were measured, yet they landed with a weight that neither Karen nor Mark could ignore. The Johnsons had always believed that education and career stability were their best shields against financial insecurity. Karen's nursing degree and decades of experience, Mark's teaching career, they had assumed these foundations would naturally lead to a comfortable retirement. But the reality was starkly different. Healthcare costs had grown exponentially since the early 2000s, a trend documented in countless economic studies. By 2025, the average retired couple could expect to spend nearly $350,000 on healthcare alone if they lived to 85, and that estimate didn't include long-term care. The Johnsons, like millions of Americans, were now staring at a gap between their expectations and reality. Even their adult children, Emily and Daniel, were not immune to the economic pressures of the era. Emily, married with a toddler, struggled with student loan debt and the rising cost of childcare. Daniel, a software engineer, had more disposable income but faced a hyper-competitive market that demanded long hours and constant skill upgrades. Both children looked to their parents for guidance, advice, and sometimes financial support, compounding the Johnsons' stress. The notion of multigenerational financial responsibility, common in American culture yet often underestimated, added another layer to their challenge. Karen began documenting every expense, creating spreadsheets that tracked everything from utilities to groceries. Each entry was a reminder that financial comfort wasn't just a future goal, it was a fragile balance maintained day by day. She noted small adjustments, cutting cable television, limiting dining out, and considering less expensive healthcare plans. Each decision, while seemingly minor, represented a negotiation between present quality of life and long-term security. Mark, on the other hand, turned his attention to supplemental income. He began tutoring retired students seeking GED certificates and offered weekend workshops for young adults preparing for college entrance exams. While these activities provided extra cash, they also served as a reminder of how retirement had become less about leisure and more about survival. In decades past, a teacher could expect to retire comfortably with a pension. Now, even those with disciplined careers found themselves supplementing income well into their 60s. Historically, the United States had encouraged the ideal of self-reliance, particularly during the post-World War II boom. Pensions, homeownership, and Social Security were once reliable pillars that allowed families to envision retirement without fear. Today, the erosion of defined benefit plans and the shift toward defined contribution systems like 401(k)s meant that risk had shifted dramatically to individuals. Investment volatility, market crashes, and rising costs of living transformed retirement planning into a complex, often stressful, task. Cinematically, winter mornings illustrated the quiet tension in the Johnson household. Frost edged the windows, the sun rising slowly over the snow-laden lawns. Karen brewed her coffee, savoring the warmth as she glanced at the family photos on the wall. There were smiles, milestones, and memories, but also a subtle weight of unspoken worry. The juxtaposition of personal warmth and financial tension created a poignant tableau of modern American life. Paul Hawkins, the financial advisor, had also introduced them to the concept of sequence of returns risk, a little-known but critical issue affecting retirees who withdraw from retirement accounts during market downturns. If the market faltered in the early years of retirement, their savings could shrink dramatically, leaving them vulnerable. This was no longer theoretical. Historical data showed that downturns like the 2008 financial crisis had derailed countless retirements, leaving ordinary families scrambling for solutions. The Johnsons realized that, despite decades of careful planning, external economic forces could dictate their quality of life in ways they had never anticipated. Karen and Mark began attending local community workshops on retirement preparedness. These sessions, often led by nonprofit organizations, provided practical advice, budgeting strategies, healthcare navigation, and investment tips tailored for seniors. While informative, they also highlighted systemic issues. Many Americans lacked access to comprehensive guidance, leaving them ill-prepared to handle complex financial realities. In these workshops, Karen noticed recurring patterns: the anxiety in the participants' eyes, the hesitant questions, the quiet acknowledgement of personal vulnerability. She understood that their struggle was not unique but emblematic of a broader societal challenge. At home, conversations with Emily and Daniel became more transparent. The Johnsons shared their concerns openly, discussing the realities of healthcare costs, market risks, and potential lifestyle adjustments. These discussions were difficult, sometimes emotionally charged, but necessary. Research in psychology shows that financial stress profoundly affects family dynamics, contributing to anxiety, sleep disturbances, and even physical health issues. By confronting these realities together, the Johnsons hoped to foster resilience across generations. Winter deepened, and with it came contemplation about long-term care and health insurance. Karen had begun exploring Medicare supplemental plans, evaluating costs, and potential gaps in coverage. She was struck by the complexity, policies with cryptic language, fine print filled with exceptions, and constantly changing regulations. The challenge of navigating healthcare bureaucracy was daunting, illustrating a fundamental tension in American society, where independence is prized, yet institutional support can be opaque and insufficient. Mark reflected on his own upbringing. He remembered his grandparents, who had retired comfortably on small pensions and simple lifestyles. The contrast between past and present was stark. Structural shifts in the economy, healthcare inflation, and changing labor markets meant that what had once been considered a safe path to retirement no longer applied. These historical shifts were invisible to many when they started working decades ago. The system had quietly evolved, leaving families like the Johnsons to bear the consequences. Despite the weight of these realities, the Johnsons sought hope where they could. They researched investment strategies, explored downsizing options, and considered relocation to areas with lower costs of living. Each decision involved trade-offs: comfort versus affordability, proximity to family versus financial stability. Cinematically, one could imagine the Johnsons walking through a small apartment for sale downtown, imagining their future in a space that felt both unfamiliar and promising, negotiating dreams with reality. By the end of winter, the Johnsons had developed a clearer picture of their situation. They realized that retirement was no longer a distant goal but a present negotiation, a careful balancing act requiring foresight, adaptability, and sometimes difficult choices. Their story illuminated broader truths about American retirement, systemic vulnerabilities, the erosion of traditional safety nets, and the psychological toll of uncertainty. The Johnsons' journey was just beginning. While the immediate challenges were pressing, they knew that understanding the landscape, educating themselves, and confronting uncomfortable realities were essential steps toward securing a meaningful future. As snow blanketed their neighborhood, they faced the future with cautious determination, embodying resilience in a world where financial security could no longer be assumed. Spring arrived slowly in Ohio, bringing a muted sense of renewal. For the Johnsons, however, the season offered no reprieve from the gnawing reality of retirement uncertainty. Karen noticed the first buds on the trees while reviewing yet another medical bill that had arrived in the mail. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the envelope down, a stark reminder that every month brought new challenges. Mark, attempting to balance optimism with pragmatism, had spent the past weeks compiling a detailed budget with projected expenses for the next 10 years. He ran countless scenarios: a minor market downturn, an unexpected medical event, or a sudden home repair. Each simulation reinforced the same uncomfortable truth: the Johnsons were vulnerable, despite decades of careful planning. The numbers, cold and exact, told a story that emotions alone could not. Retirement was no longer a guaranteed period of comfort but a precarious negotiation with uncertainty. The children, Emily and Daniel, had noticed the tension. Emily confided in her mother one evening, "Mom, I worry about you and Dad. Are we doing enough to help?" Karen smiled gently, masking her anxiety. "We're figuring it out together," she said, though the reassurance rang hollow even to her own ears. Psychological studies on family dynamics and financial stress show that open communication can mitigate tension, yet the underlying anxiety often persists, creating a subtle, constant pressure on all involved. One Saturday, Mark and Karen attended a community seminar on retirement planning, hosted by a nonprofit organization focused on senior financial literacy. The room was filled with retirees, pre-retirees, and adult children like Emily and Daniel. The seminar highlighted the stark disparities in retirement preparedness. Nearly half of Americans approaching retirement age had saved less than $100,000, and more than a third had no retirement savings at all. For the Johnsons, these statistics were more than numbers. They were a reflection of the society they had lived in, a society that had quietly shifted the responsibility of financial security onto individuals while promising a safety net that had eroded over time. The presenter, a retired economist named Laura Sims, emphasized strategies for managing risk, diversified investments, careful monitoring of healthcare costs, and realistic lifestyle planning. She also discussed the hidden costs of retirement, inflation, rising healthcare premiums, and unexpected long-term care expenses. Karen scribbled notes furiously, her mind racing with questions. Could they realistically downsize without losing community connections? Would relocating to a lower-cost area compromise family visits? Every decision was a negotiation between financial survival and emotional well-being. Back at home, the Johnsons faced another pressing issue: their aging home. Built in the 1970s, it had character, memories, and sentimental value, but also plumbing problems, an aging furnace, and a roof nearing the end of its life. Mark walked through the house one afternoon, inspecting each room with a mixture of nostalgia and anxiety. He considered the cost of repairs versus the potential benefit of selling and downsizing. Every calculation reminded him that retirement wasn't just about savings, it was about managing a lifetime of accumulated responsibilities, many of which were invisible in simple financial statements. Karen, meanwhile, delved into health insurance research. Medicare and supplemental plans were a labyrinth of options, premiums, deductibles, and co-pays. The more she read, the more she realized that knowledge alone wasn't enough. The system was structured to favor those with financial literacy, time, and resources to navigate it. Anthropological studies suggest that societies with robust elder care systems reduce intergenerational financial pressure. In the U.S., the absence of such comprehensive support structures leaves families like the Johnsons to shoulder the burden largely alone. Even social life carried financial weight. Invitations from friends often came with unspoken expectations: dinners at pricey restaurants, weekend getaways, or contributions to community events. The Johnsons found themselves declining invitations more frequently, balancing social belonging against fiscal responsibility. Cinematically, one could picture Karen and Mark sitting in the dim light of their living room, the city outside blooming with spring activity, while they quietly discussed whether they could afford another family outing without jeopardizing their savings. As April approached, Emily began discussing college funds for her toddler. Karen and Mark realized that supporting their grandchildren's education was another layer in the complex web of financial responsibility. While American culture often emphasizes upward mobility and educational achievement, these expectations create additional stress for older generations, who may already be struggling with their own future security. Balancing these cultural pressures with practical limitations was a daily exercise in compromise and negotiation. Mark decided to consult with Paul Hawkins again, this time focusing on potential investment strategies to bridge the savings gap. Paul outlined several options: reallocating portions of their 401k into lower-risk bonds, exploring annuities, and considering part-time work during early retirement years. Each option carried trade-offs: lower risk meant potentially lower returns, while annuities could guarantee income but limited liquidity. Even as they listened to Paul's advice, Karen and Mark felt the weight of uncertainty pressing against them. The American retirement system, once thought secure, demanded constant vigilance, knowledge, and adaptability. Beyond numbers, there was an emotional toll. The Johnsons occasionally found themselves reflecting on what life would have been like had they chosen different paths, different careers, higher-earning jobs, or fewer family obligations. These reflections were tinged with regret, yet they also reinforced a determination to adapt and persevere. Psychology research indicates that financial stress can affect emotional resilience, but proactive problem-solving and family cohesion help mitigate long-term negative effects. The Johnsons leaned into these strategies, consciously supporting each other and involving Emily and Daniel in open, constructive conversations. By May, small victories began to appear. Mark successfully negotiated a lower interest rate on a lingering mortgage balance, while Karen discovered a supplemental insurance plan that reduced out-of-pocket expenses. Each success, though modest, reinforced their belief that active engagement and continuous learning could partially offset systemic vulnerabilities. Yet they knew these solutions were temporary measures in a landscape defined by structural challenges beyond their control. The Johnsons also began considering community resources beyond financial advice, senior centers, volunteer opportunities, and local networks that could offer both social engagement and practical support. They realized that retirement wasn't only about money, it was about building a sustainable lifestyle that accounted for health, emotional well-being, and meaningful social connections. Anthropology and sociology suggest that community support significantly impacts elder quality of life, a lesson the Johnsons embraced as they explored options beyond their immediate household. Cinematically, late spring evenings brought moments of quiet reflection. Karen would sit on the porch, listening to birdsong and distant traffic, contemplating the delicate balance between hope and anxiety. Mark would join her occasionally, both silent, yet united in purpose. These small rituals, simple, unremarkable, became anchors in a life otherwise defined by financial complexity and uncertainty. By the end of Part 3, the Johnsons had begun to understand a critical truth: retirement in modern America is not a guaranteed phase of comfort. It is a journey marked by constant negotiation, adaptability, and proactive engagement. Through careful planning, family cohesion, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable realities, the Johnsons had found a path forward, imperfect, uncertain, but navigable. Their story reflects a broader national reality. Millions of Americans face similar challenges, navigating a system that rewards foresight but punishes vulnerability, balancing personal dreams against economic realities, and seeking stability in a world increasingly defined by uncertainty. Summer brought long days and fleeting warmth to Ohio, yet the Johnsons found little comfort in the season. Financial anxiety did not pause for sunshine. Karen sat on the porch early one morning, notebook in hand, reviewing the latest medical bills for routine checkups. Even with insurance, out-of-pocket costs had steadily climbed over the past decade. Mark joined her, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, and they exchanged a look that spoke volumes. These weren't minor inconveniences, they were creeping threats to their envisioned retirement. Healthcare, they realized, was the most unpredictable variable in their financial equation. Despite decades of contributions to Medicare, supplemental plans, and personal savings, they were vulnerable to sudden health crises. Studies show that unexpected medical expenses are the leading cause of bankruptcy among older Americans, particularly when chronic conditions emerge. For Karen, who had managed minor health issues for years, the thought of a serious illness loomed like a storm cloud, an invisible adversary with the potential to derail everything they had built. Mark, ever the planner, had begun examining long-term care options. Nursing homes and assisted living facilities were prohibitively expensive, often exceeding $8,000 per month for full-time care. Even partial in-home care, though seemingly less daunting, threatened to consume large portions of their retirement savings. The Johnsons had always envisioned aging with dignity, maintaining independence while enjoying the comforts of their home. Now, they faced the stark reality that those ideals might be financially unattainable. The family's adult children, Emily and Daniel, felt the pressure too. Emily had recently returned from a parent-teacher conference and expressed concern about her mother's blood pressure medication cost. Daniel, working long hours in tech, worried about his parents' financial stability even as he tried to manage his own household expenses. Generational pressures in American families often manifest subtly, through shared concern, unspoken responsibility, and the delicate balance of emotional and financial support. The Johnsons were acutely aware that their decisions would ripple outward, affecting their children's lives as much as their own. Mark scheduled a meeting with Paul Hawkins to explore strategies for mitigating healthcare risk. Paul suggested a combination of health savings accounts, HSAs, supplemental insurance, and conservative investment strategies to create a financial buffer. Yet, the discussion also illuminated systemic challenges. Market volatility could erode savings faster than anticipated, interest rates remained uncertain, and the healthcare system continued to inflate costs faster than wages or returns on investment. Even disciplined planning required constant vigilance. Cinematically, the Johnsons' struggles unfolded in subtle domestic rhythms. Karen meticulously labeled each prescription bottle and receipt, creating color-coded folders that mapped the financial weight of their medical needs. Mark sat at the kitchen table late at night, spreadsheet open, calculator in hand, projecting scenarios for the next decade. Outside, the neighborhood children played under the fading light of summer, oblivious to the silent tension that permeated the Johnson household. The contrast between carefree youth and the weight of adult responsibility underscored a universal truth: life in America, particularly for those approaching retirement, was a balancing act between hope and harsh reality. The Johnsons also confronted market volatility firsthand. Investments that had once seemed safe, diversified funds, bonds, and mutual accounts, fluctuated unpredictably. News of global economic instability, corporate bankruptcies, and rising inflation became more than headlines; they were variables that directly impacted the couple's future. Historical data indicated that retirees who began withdrawals during market downturns often faced decades of reduced financial security. Mark, who had once believed in the steady growth of the American economy, now understood the fragility underlying decades of promises about pensions, savings, and the golden years. Karen and Mark debated downsizing their home as a potential solution. A smaller property would reduce maintenance costs, property taxes, and utility bills, freeing up capital for healthcare and retirement savings. Yet the idea carried emotional weight. This house was more than a structure; it was a repository of memories, family milestones, and tangible proof of a lifetime of hard work. Letting go felt like surrender, yet holding on risked financial strain. The tension between practicality and sentiment became a recurring theme, reflecting a broader American dilemma: the trade-off between emotional attachment and economic necessity. Emily suggested exploring multigenerational living arrangements, a practice historically more common in other cultures but gradually re-emerging in the U.S. due to rising housing and healthcare costs. Karen and Mark considered the idea, welcoming Emily, her toddler, and potentially Daniel into the same household could create financial efficiencies and mutual support. Yet they worried about privacy, autonomy, and the dynamics of intergenerational living. Social norms, especially in suburban America, often conflict with economic reality, forcing families into difficult negotiations between cultural expectations and practical necessity. By midsummer, the Johnsons had started to incorporate small lifestyle adjustments. Karen replaced the old lawn mower with a more energy-efficient model, Mark negotiated reduced insurance premiums, and both began to track utility consumption with meticulous attention. Each minor adjustment, while seemingly trivial, reflected an acute awareness: retirement security was not a static goal but a daily, active process. Community resources became increasingly vital. Karen joined a local support group for pre-retirees navigating healthcare challenges. Members shared strategies for accessing subsidies, negotiating medical bills, and understanding policy changes. Listening to others' experiences, Karen realized that their struggles were part of a national trend. Millions of Americans were navigating a retirement landscape far more complex than public discourse often acknowledged. The personal stories, fear, resilience, and adaptation, humanized the abstract statistics, reinforcing the urgency of proactive planning. One evening, as thunderstorms rolled across Ohio, Karen and Mark reviewed their portfolio again. Mark pointed to a chart showing projected shortfalls if current market conditions persisted. Karen's hand hovered over the spreadsheet, and she whispered, "We've done everything we can, haven't we?" Mark sighed, realizing that despite decades of careful work, the system itself was a variable they could not fully control. The question was no longer about diligence alone, it was about adaptability, resilience, and informed decision-making. The Johnsons also began exploring alternative income streams. Karen considered consulting in nursing education part-time, while Mark entertained tutoring opportunities beyond his previous workshops. While these options offered modest financial relief, they also symbolized a broader reality. Retirement in America increasingly requires continued engagement with the workforce, blurring the traditional line between work and leisure. The cinematic image of them balancing spreadsheets, professional responsibilities, and family obligations captured the tension of modern retirement, a life of constant calculation beneath a veneer of normalcy. By the end of summer, the Johnsons had gained a tentative sense of control. They understood that absolute security was unattainable, yet strategic planning, careful lifestyle adjustments, and family cohesion could mitigate some of the risks. Retirement was no longer a distant dream but a present negotiation, a continual assessment of risk versus reward, cost versus comfort. The lessons they absorbed, about healthcare, market volatility, and generational responsibility, would guide them in the years ahead, illuminating the complex reality behind the American retirement ideal. The Johnsons' journey, though deeply personal, mirrored the experiences of countless Americans. Their story highlighted systemic vulnerabilities, the psychological burden of uncertainty, and the cultural expectations shaping intergenerational financial responsibility. It was a story of resilience in the face of structural challenges, an intimate reflection of a national reality. Retirement, once idealized as a period of rest and reward, had become a complex, emotionally charged, and financially demanding phase of life. Autumn arrived with crisp winds and golden leaves, but for the Johnsons, the changing season brought little comfort. Karen sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, scanning the latest Social Security statement. She traced her finger along the numbers, feeling the weight of decades of contributions juxtaposed against the modest benefits they were projected to receive. The statement, precise and impersonal, masked the deep uncertainty lurking beneath. For millions of Americans, Social Security alone was insufficient to sustain a comfortable retirement. Mark leaned over her shoulder. "It's better than nothing," he said, attempting optimism, though his eyes betrayed concern. They both knew the statistics. The average retired American couple could expect to receive around $2,500 per month from Social Security, barely enough to cover housing, utilities, and basic living expenses. Any unexpected medical bills or emergencies could quickly erode what little security the program offered. The Johnson story reflected a broader reality. The erosion of defined benefit pensions had left ordinary Americans more exposed than previous generations. Historically, pensions provided a predictable income stream, shielding retirees from market fluctuations and offering peace of mind. But over the past 4 decades, the shift toward defined contribution plans, such as 401(k)s, transferred the risk from institutions to individuals. For Karen and Mark, this shift meant that their future comfort was no longer guaranteed, it was contingent on market performance, investment decisions, and personal health. Emily and Daniel occasionally asked questions that cut to the heart of the matter. "Mom, Dad, are we going to have to worry about you?" Emily asked one evening, her toddler asleep nearby. Karen took a deep breath. "We're doing our best, sweetheart," she said, though even she felt the uncertainty lurking beneath her words. Intergenerational concern, a natural feature of American family dynamics, added psychological complexity to financial stress, creating subtle but persistent tension across households. Seeking clarity, the Johnsons revisited Paul Hawkins, their financial advisor. Paul laid out the reality in stark terms: conservative estimates suggested their retirement savings would allow them to maintain their current lifestyle for roughly 10 to 12 years, assuming no major emergencies and modest market growth. Any deviation, such as a healthcare crisis, economic downturn, or significant inflation spike, could shorten that horizon dramatically. Mark and Karen listened intently, the room filled with quiet tension. The numbers were precise, unemotional, yet their implications were profound. Cinematically, the scene unfolded in muted tones, sunlight filtering through blinds, paper statements spread across the table, coffee cups half full, and the faint hum of suburban life outside. The juxtaposition of domestic tranquility with the gravity of financial reality created an atmosphere of quiet anxiety, a visual metaphor for the invisible burdens many Americans carry. The Johnsons explored various strategies to bridge the gap. Karen considered delaying retirement by several years, extending her career in nursing to maximize contributions and savings. Mark, similarly, debated continuing part-time teaching or consulting work beyond the traditional retirement age. While these solutions provided incremental financial relief, they also complicated the emotional and physical dimensions of aging. Retirement, once imagined as rest and leisure, now appeared as a period requiring active engagement, careful management, and resilience. Investment strategies became a central focus. The Johnsons reviewed their portfolio, balancing equities, bonds, and mutual funds to optimize growth while minimizing risk. Yet market volatility remained an ever-present concern. Historical events, the 2008 financial crisis, the dot-com bubble, and global recessions, served as stark reminders that even the most disciplined investors could be blindsided. Karen and Mark recognized that retirement security depended not just on savings, but on adaptability and continuous monitoring of financial markets. Cultural expectations added another layer of complexity. American society often romanticizes retirement as a reward for decades of labor, an opportunity for travel, hobbies, and freedom. Yet these ideals frequently clash with economic realities. Families like the Johnsons must navigate the tension between aspiration and practicality, reconciling dreams of leisure with the necessity of financial prudence. The cinematic imagery of summer vacations postponed, hobbies deferred, and long-held plans adjusted painted a nuanced picture of the modern retirement experience. Social Security policy itself introduced uncertainty. Recent political debates and proposals to adjust benefits, raise the retirement age, or modify cost-of-living adjustments heightened the sense of instability. For the Johnsons, this meant that even their most basic source of income could not be taken for granted. The program that once symbolized guaranteed stability had become, in their minds, a fragile promise, dependable, yet insufficient, and vulnerable to policy shifts. Healthcare remained a looming variable. Chronic conditions, prescription costs, and potential long-term care expenses created financial pressure that no pension or savings account could fully anticipate. Karen meticulously researched Medicare supplemental plans, weighing coverage against premiums, deductibles, and co-payments. Each plan required careful consideration, yet the system's complexity often obfuscated clarity. The Johnsons realized that navigating healthcare, investment risk, and retirement planning simultaneously demanded knowledge, time, and emotional resilience. Cinematically, one could picture Karen in the dim light of the study, computer open, spreadsheets and policy documents scattered around, while Mark calculated projections on a notepad. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the lawn, the quiet suburban scene contrasting sharply with the intense deliberation unfolding within. These small domestic rituals, reviewing statements, consulting advisors, planning contingencies, became the daily rhythm of their lives, emblematic of the silent struggle faced by millions of Americans approaching retirement. As October deepened, the Johnsons discussed contingency plans. Downsizing remained an option, though fraught with emotional weight. Relocation to a lower-cost region was considered, balancing financial benefits against proximity to family and community ties. Part-time work, investment reallocation, and frugal lifestyle adjustments formed a multi-pronged approach aimed at creating a buffer against systemic vulnerabilities. Each decision required compromise, calculation, and the acceptance that their retirement would not align perfectly with earlier dreams. Emily and Daniel participated actively in these discussions, learning not only about practical financial strategies but also about the psychological and emotional dimensions of money. Intergenerational communication, research shows, strengthens family cohesion and resilience in the face of economic uncertainty. The Johnsons' willingness to share challenges openly allowed their children to understand the stakes, prepare for their own futures, and contribute thoughtfully to family decision-making. By the end of Part 5, the Johnsons had begun to navigate the fragile landscape of American retirement with increased awareness. They recognized that Social Security, savings, and investments were interconnected yet individually insufficient. Success depended on adaptability, vigilance, and proactive planning. While absolute security remained elusive, their strategic approach offered a measure of control in a world increasingly defined by uncertainty. Their story exemplifies a broader national phenomenon: retirement, once idealized as a phase of reward, has evolved into a complex negotiation between personal preparation, systemic limitations, and cultural expectations. For the Johnsons, as for millions of Americans, the challenge lies not only in accumulating wealth but in managing the intricate web of economic, social, and emotional factors that define life beyond work. Winter crept back over Ohio, painting the Johnsons' suburban neighborhood in shades of gray and white. The crisp air carried a sense of both renewal and inevitability. For the Johnsons, however, this season underscored an ever-present concern: health. Despite decades of careful living, the reality of aging was unavoidable, and with it came financial and emotional implications that demanded constant attention. Karen's routine checkups revealed minor but persistent health concerns, slight hypertension and early signs of joint discomfort. While not immediately alarming, these issues foreshadowed potential long-term medical expenses. Each appointment reminded her that healthcare was more than a cost, it was a variable capable of destabilizing their carefully calculated retirement plan. Medical bills, insurance premiums, prescription costs, all combined to form a complex web that required constant navigation. Mark accompanied Karen to her appointments, noting every detail, every cost, and every recommendation. Their discussions at home revolved around contingencies. What if a minor condition worsened? Could their savings withstand the mounting expenses of chronic care? Social science research indicates that the fear of health-related financial strain is a significant contributor to stress in aging populations, affecting sleep, mood, and decision-making. For the Johnsons, these worries were tangible and persistent. The family's adult children, Emily and Daniel, remained closely involved. Emily voiced concerns about long-term care planning, asking questions that Karen and Mark had sometimes avoided. Daniel researched local nursing facilities, comparing costs, amenities, and availability. These conversations were difficult, fraught with emotion, yet necessary. They highlighted the intergenerational pressures inherent in American families. Adult children, while independent, are often drawn into their parents' financial and health-related decisions. Karen began exploring long-term care insurance, a notoriously complex market filled with policies that varied in coverage, premiums, and exclusions. Each plan required careful scrutiny, and the fine print could obscure potential vulnerabilities. Consulting with Paul Hawkins, they considered multiple scenarios: home care, partial facility care, or full-time assisted living. Each choice carried trade-offs: financial, emotional, and logistical. The Johnsons realized that strategic planning had to be proactive and comprehensive, or risk being overwhelmed when a health crisis inevitably occurred. Market volatility remained a persistent concern. Even as Karen and Mark accounted for healthcare, investments, and Social Security, fluctuations in the stock and bond markets continued to affect their projected retirement income. The sequence of returns risk, a principle emphasizing that withdrawing funds during market downturns can drastically reduce long-term security, loomed over their decisions. Each drop in the market triggered recalculations, adding layers of uncertainty to their daily lives. Cinematically, winter afternoons highlighted the quiet tension at home. Karen sat at the kitchen table, papers and policy documents spread in front of her, the sunlight muted by gray clouds. Mark hovered nearby, calculator in hand, charting possible scenarios for medical expenses and investment returns. Outside, neighborhood children slid down snow-laden streets, laughter echoing across lawns. The contrast between their domestic anxiety and the carefree energy beyond the windows underscored the invisible burden of retirement uncertainty. As the Johnsons navigated these challenges, they also faced emotional strain. The psychological toll of financial and health-related stress manifested subtly but persistently: tension in conversations, moments of irritability, and occasional bouts of sleeplessness. Studies in gerontology indicate that prolonged stress associated with financial insecurity can exacerbate health problems, creating a feedback loop where worry contributes to physical decline. Karen and Mark became acutely aware that managing emotions was as crucial as managing money. Community resources provided some relief. Karen joined a local support group for pre-retirees and retirees, where participants shared experiences navigating healthcare, insurance, and long-term care. The stories ranged from minor frustrations to catastrophic financial setbacks. Listening to others' experiences, Karen and Mark recognized that their struggles, while deeply personal, were part of a broader societal reality. Retirement in America demanded adaptability, knowledge, and resilience. Emily and Daniel contributed to practical planning as well. They helped research tax implications of retirement withdrawals, potential government subsidies for healthcare, and strategies for portfolio diversification. Their involvement underscored a key aspect of modern retirement: multi-generational collaboration. While independence is a central value in American culture, families increasingly rely on shared knowledge and resources to navigate an uncertain financial landscape. Mark also began exploring part-time opportunities to supplement income during early retirement years. He offered tutoring and workshops beyond his teaching background, recognizing that continued engagement with work could provide both financial relief and psychological structure. Karen considered consulting in nursing education, balancing potential income against energy and time demands. These steps highlighted a key reality: modern retirement often requires ongoing activity, blending leisure with strategic financial management. Culturally, the Johnsons' experiences reflect broader shifts in American expectations. Whereas previous generations could rely on stable pensions and social safety nets, contemporary retirees must navigate a complex landscape of personal responsibility, market risk, and evolving healthcare systems. Anthropological perspectives suggest that the ideal of self-reliance is deeply embedded in American identity, yet systemic vulnerabilities challenge the feasibility of achieving a secure retirement without extensive planning and adaptation. As December approached, the Johnsons took stock of progress. They had consolidated medical documents, optimized insurance plans, explored income supplements, and engaged their children in planning discussions. Yet uncertainty remained: a single health crisis, market downturn, or policy change could disrupt even the most disciplined strategy. This tension, between preparation and unpredictability, defined their daily reality, shaping routines, conversations, and choices. Cinematically, the image of the Johnsons gathered at the kitchen table late in the evening captured the emotional weight of these decisions. Papers, laptops, and calculators surrounded them. Outside, snow swirled in soft currents, the quiet suburban night punctuated by distant car headlights. Within, strategies were debated, risks evaluated, and contingency plans refined. The scene embodied the complex intersection of domestic life, financial management, and emotional resilience that characterizes modern American retirement. By the end of Part 6, Karen and Mark had achieved a nuanced understanding, retirement was not a static goal but an ongoing negotiation, a process demanding vigilance, adaptability, and emotional resilience. They had learned that securing a meaningful future required more than savings, it required knowledge, proactive planning, and intergenerational collaboration. Their journey illuminated the broader American context. Millions face similar challenges, navigating a landscape shaped by economic shifts, healthcare inflation, and evolving cultural expectations. The Johnsons' experience demonstrates that while retirement remains a desirable phase of life, achieving stability and dignity within it demands constant engagement and strategic foresight. The first frost of the year coated Ohio in a delicate white, yet the Johnsons' home was anything but tranquil. Inside, the weight of looming financial uncertainty pressed on every conversation, every calculation. Karen and Mark had long realized that retirement was not a destination but a constantly shifting landscape, a terrain shaped by investments, policy changes, and systemic inequities. One evening, Karen opened her laptop to review their retirement portfolio. The previous week's market fluctuations had caused a noticeable dip in value. Stocks she had once considered stable now appeared volatile, and bond returns, while modest, could not keep pace with inflation. "Mark," she said quietly, "I don't think even conservative strategies can guarantee us security anymore." Mark's face tightened. The realization was stark: decades of careful saving, frugal living, and strategic investments could still be undermined by forces beyond their control. The Johnsons were painfully aware of how market risk shaped retirement prospects for millions of Americans. The financial crisis of 2008 had left indelible marks on public consciousness. Even today, retirees face the possibility of sequence of returns risk, where withdrawing from retirement accounts during downturns could drastically reduce long-term security. Paul Hawkins had warned them, even minor fluctuations in the early years of retirement could ripple through their financial plan, potentially altering lifestyle and security in profound ways. Emily and Daniel occasionally expressed concern, asking whether their parents' investments were too exposed. Karen and Mark explained the delicate balance: diversification could mitigate some risk, but no strategy could fully insulate them from economic turbulence. Their children listened, absorbing lessons in financial literacy while grappling with their own emerging responsibilities. The family's intergenerational discussions illustrated the subtle, pervasive nature of financial anxiety in modern American life. Policy uncertainties added another layer of complexity. Discussions of Social Security reform, Medicare adjustments, and changing tax codes were more than abstract debates; they had direct consequences for the Johnsons' future. Analysts projected that proposed changes could either reduce benefits or increase the retirement age, subtly shifting the burden onto individuals. For the Johnsons, this was a reminder that retirement security was not only a personal responsibility but also contingent upon political and systemic factors largely beyond their control. Cinematically, these challenges unfolded in quiet domestic spaces. Karen sat at the kitchen table, spreadsheets and policy documents sprawled before her, while Mark jotted projections on a notepad. Outside, the neighborhood was coated in frost, cars sliding along icy streets, the wind whispering against windowpanes. Inside, the couple navigated the invisible storm of financial risk, policy uncertainty, and systemic inequities that defined modern retirement. Healthcare continued to loom as the largest variable. Karen's medications, routine checkups, and preventive care had been manageable thus far, but even minor complications could escalate costs exponentially. Long-term care planning remained a pressing concern, as costs for assisted living or in-home care far exceeded most expectations. Despite their best efforts, the Johnsons were acutely aware that systemic issues, rising healthcare costs, limited insurance coverage, and bureaucratic complexity, left ordinary Americans vulnerable at precisely the time when independence was most valued. The couple also confronted the reality of income inequality. Studies consistently show that households in the top income brackets are far better equipped to weather market volatility, healthcare expenses, and retirement shortfalls. Meanwhile, middle-class families like the Johnsons, despite education, savings, and disciplined planning, remain exposed. This systemic disparity added an emotional dimension to their struggle. Frustration and awareness of structural inequities complicated the otherwise practical work of planning for retirement. Mark revisited part-time consulting and tutoring options to supplement potential shortfalls. While not ideal, these opportunities offered financial relief and a psychological buffer, a sense of agency amidst uncertainty. Karen considered flexible nursing education consulting, weighing income potential against energy and personal health. The delicate balancing act between income generation, personal well-being, and future planning had become central to their daily lives. Cultural expectations in America compounded these challenges. Retirement has long been framed as a reward for hard work, a period to enjoy freedom, leisure, and accumulated wealth. Yet structural shifts, from the decline of pensions to healthcare inflation and rising housing costs, meant that the traditional narrative often clashed with lived reality. Families like the Johnsons had to reconcile societal ideals with economic constraints, crafting a version of retirement that was attainable yet compromised. Financial literacy emerged as a critical tool. Karen and Mark attended workshops, read extensively, and engaged in meticulous planning. Yet even with diligence, uncertainty persisted. The couple realized that knowledge alone could not eliminate risk. Adaptability, vigilance, and strategic decision-making were equally essential. Cinematically, one could picture them huddled over charts late into the evening, coffee cooling beside spreadsheets, while the world outside moved obliviously. The quiet intensity of their planning sessions mirrored a broader national experience, millions navigating invisible pressures and systemic challenges in pursuit of security. Emily suggested revisiting housing options, including relocating to a region with lower costs of living. The conversation sparked both hope and hesitation. A move could free capital, reduce ongoing expenses, and ease long-term planning. Yet emotional attachment to home, proximity to extended family, and community ties complicated the decision. The Johnsons were forced to weigh financial pragmatism against sentimental and social values, a recurring theme in modern American retirement. The couple also considered contingency planning for healthcare emergencies. They explored supplemental policies, negotiated coverage options, and reviewed potential government subsidies. Each scenario required meticulous attention, balancing premiums, deductibles, and projected expenses. These exercises, though practical, reinforced the emotional weight of their situation. Retirement, they realized, demanded not just savings but proactive risk management, continuous monitoring, and readiness to adjust strategies in response to evolving conditions. Cinematically, late winter evenings captured the quiet persistence of their efforts. Karen and Mark, illuminated by the soft glow of lamps, navigated spreadsheets, insurance documents, and investment statements. Outside, the wind rattled trees and brushed snow across the sidewalk. Inside, every calculation, every decision, and every strategy reflected the intricate negotiation between hope, risk, and reality. Their domestic space became both a refuge and a command center, a place where the stakes of modern retirement were confronted with rigor and emotional depth. By the end of Part 7, the Johnsons had gained clarity about the systemic and personal factors shaping their future. Investments, policy shifts, healthcare costs, and income inequality were interwoven variables, each demanding attention and strategy. While absolute security remained elusive, the family's methodical approach, integrating planning, adaptability, and intergenerational communication, provided a framework for navigating uncertainty. The Johnsons' journey underscored a broader truth: modern American retirement is a complex negotiation between personal responsibility and structural vulnerability. It is defined not only by savings and income but also by policy, healthcare systems, and economic inequities. For millions, the pursuit of a stable, dignified retirement requires constant vigilance, adaptability, and emotional resilience. Winter's chill lingered longer than usual, blanketing Ohio in gray skies and muted streets. Inside the Johnson household, however, life moved in measured rhythms of planning and adaptation. Karen and Mark had reached a critical understanding. Retirement was no longer an abstract goal, it was an ongoing negotiation requiring discipline, emotional resilience, and strategic foresight. They had navigated medical costs, market volatility, social security uncertainties, and intergenerational pressures. Now, their focus shifted toward integrating these lessons into a sustainable, realistic plan. Karen spent the early mornings at the kitchen table, a planner open beside her laptop. She meticulously reviewed bills, insurance statements, and investment performance charts. Each entry represented a choice, a calculated step toward stability. Mark, meanwhile, updated spreadsheets reflecting potential income from part-time work, projected healthcare expenses, and realistic living costs. The scene was cinematic in its quiet intensity, sunlight filtered through frost-laced windows, dust motes floating lazily, while the couple engaged in the unglamorous but essential labor of safeguarding their future. One key strategy involved downsizing the family home. After long discussions, they identified a smaller property nearby that offered lower maintenance, reduced taxes, and proximity to Emily and Daniel. Emotional attachment complicated the decision, memories of birthdays, holidays, and milestones made leaving difficult, but practicality prevailed. Anthropological studies on aging suggest that attachment to material spaces can conflict with pragmatic needs, and the Johnsons embodied this tension. Their choice reflected compromise. They preserved family cohesion while reducing financial vulnerability. Healthcare planning remained central. Karen finalized a supplemental Medicare plan that optimized coverage while controlling premiums and out-of-pocket costs. Mark researched preventive care strategies, identifying lifestyle adjustments that could mitigate future medical expenses. The couple also began exploring long-term care options, establishing contingency plans in case either required assisted living or specialized home care. These preparations provided psychological relief, converting uncertainty into manageable variables rather than omnipresent threats. Cinematically, the transformation was subtle but powerful. Packing boxes, sorting through decades of possessions, and preparing the new home created visual tension and narrative depth. Each item held memory and meaning, yet the act of selection, preservation, or donation became a metaphor for prioritization, choosing what truly mattered for the family's well-being and future security. Financial strategies continued to evolve. Mark and Karen diversified their investments further, balancing risk with potential growth. They monitored inflation, adjusted withdrawals, and recalibrated contingency funds. They also maintained emergency reserves to address unexpected events, understanding that flexibility was as important as accumulation. Economic research confirms that proactive, diversified planning significantly reduces vulnerability to market fluctuations, and the Johnsons had internalized this principle. Emily and Daniel played a critical role. They assisted with technology, researched policy updates, and contributed to practical planning decisions. The family engaged in transparent discussions about trade-offs, including potential adjustments to lifestyle, travel, and discretionary spending. These conversations, while occasionally tense, strengthened family cohesion. Psychological studies emphasize that shared decision-making in financial planning reduces stress and fosters resilience. The Johnsons' experience exemplified this dynamic. Part of adaptation involved redefining expectations. While the traditional vision of retirement, long leisure, luxury travel, and complete financial independence, remained alluring, the Johnsons accepted a more nuanced reality. They prioritized security, health, and family connection over extravagance. Cinematic imagery captured this evolution: quiet evenings playing board games with grandchildren, shared meals in the new home, and walks through frost-covered streets. These moments embodied fulfillment without excess, emphasizing quality of life rather than unattainable ideals. The Johnsons also integrated community resources. Karen joined a wellness program at a local senior center, while Mark engaged in volunteer tutoring. These activities provided social engagement, mental stimulation, and supplemental income in subtle ways. Sociology research demonstrates that active participation in community networks improves psychological well-being and prolongs functional independence among older adults, a principle the Johnsons embraced through deliberate, structured involvement. Financial literacy remained a priority. Karen continued to attend workshops, read extensively, and engage with online financial planning tools. Mark monitored global economic news and market trends, adjusting strategies accordingly. They understood that retirement security was dynamic, shaped not only by savings but by continuous learning, vigilance, and adaptability. Cinematically, these quiet evenings of study contrasted with the bustling neighborhood outside, visually symbolizing the invisible labor that sustains stability. The couple also focused on emotional resilience. Mindful practices, reflective journaling, and open dialogue with Emily and Daniel created a supportive environment. They recognized that stress, if unmanaged, could exacerbate health issues and hinder decision-making. Integrating psychological self-care into their planning routine was as critical as reviewing finances or healthcare policies. By late winter, the Johnsons had established a coherent, adaptable roadmap for retirement. Downsizing, supplemental healthcare planning, investment diversification, and part-time work created a layered safety net. Emotional preparation, family involvement, and community engagement enhanced resilience. The balance was delicate but intentional. Financial prudence harmonized with personal fulfillment, security intersected with autonomy, and preparation mitigated uncertainty without eliminating life's richness. Reflecting on their journey, Karen and Mark acknowledged the broader implications. Their challenges were deeply personal yet emblematic of national trends: rising healthcare costs, volatile markets, policy uncertainties, and systemic inequities shaped the modern American retirement landscape. Millions of families faced similar struggles, negotiating security through strategic planning, adaptability, and intergenerational collaboration. Their story, cinematic and human, illuminated the silent labor that underpins a stable retirement in contemporary society. Culturally, the Johnsons' experience underscores a transformation in American retirement ideals. The post-World War II expectation of guaranteed comfort has shifted into a paradigm of personal responsibility, adaptability, and active engagement. Structural changes, declining pensions, rising healthcare costs, and market-driven retirement accounts have reshaped the retirement journey into one defined by vigilance, informed decision-making, and emotional resilience. Cinematically, the conclusion of this phase is vivid. Karen and Mark, in their smaller home, sunlight streaming through frost-lined windows, children and grandchildren visiting, papers organized neatly on the kitchen table. Each visual element underscores the equilibrium they have created: not perfection, but stability; not total independence, but sufficiency. Their home is both a refuge and a command center, symbolizing the intricate blend of planning, adaptation, and emotional strength required to navigate modern retirement. By the end of Part 8, the Johnsons had transformed uncertainty into a structured, manageable process. They had confronted financial, healthcare, and generational challenges, adapted to structural inequities, and cultivated emotional resilience. Their journey demonstrates that, while absolute security is elusive, informed planning, intergenerational collaboration, and emotional preparedness create a pathway toward a meaningful, sustainable retirement. Their story leaves the audience with a clear insight: modern American retirement is less about inevitability and more about navigation. It demands continuous engagement, strategic foresight, and conscious adaptation to an ever-shifting economic, cultural, and personal landscape. The Johnsons embody resilience in action, a cinematic and relatable portrait of the nuanced, often invisible labor required to secure stability and dignity in later life. Early spring returned to Ohio, softening the frozen streets and signaling the slow renewal of life. For the Johnsons, however, each season carried its own weight. Karen and Mark had structured a retirement strategy that balanced investments, supplemental income, healthcare, and family support. Yet long-term sustainability remained a central concern. The realization was stark: planning for retirement was not a single milestone, but an ongoing process demanding constant reassessment. Karen reviewed the portfolio while Mark monitored potential market shifts. Even modest fluctuations had the power to alter projections significantly. Sequence of returns risk, inflation, and unexpected healthcare costs loomed like distant storms. While their strategy offered a buffer, they understood that adaptability was as essential as accumulation. The cinematic tableau was clear: late afternoon light cast soft shadows on their organized chaos of spreadsheets, bills, and policy documents, emphasizing the invisible labor underpinning retirement stability. Their children, Emily and Daniel, increasingly engaged in planning discussions. Emily, now a mother of two, expressed concerns about balancing childcare, career growth, and supporting her parents. Daniel, navigating his own household finances, weighed contributions against his own long-term goals. These conversations reflected broader American realities. Multi-generational interdependence is both emotional and financial, especially when structural support systems are limited. Social science research underscores that proactive intergenerational dialogue strengthens resilience, reduces anxiety, and promotes informed decision-making. Healthcare planning remained central. Karen scheduled preventive screenings and monitored lifestyle adjustments to minimize future medical expenses. Mark researched long-term care insurance updates and potential Medicare changes. They maintained meticulous records, tracking premiums, deductibles, and projected out-of-pocket costs. This detailed attention transformed uncertainty into actionable variables, mitigating stress and enabling informed decisions. The cinematic image of Karen flipping through policy documents, sunlight catching dust in the air, and Mark calculating on a notepad, conveyed a quiet but profound intensity, a visual representation of invisible work that defines modern retirement. The Johnsons also considered housing options. Their smaller home, chosen for financial prudence, allowed for lower maintenance costs while preserving proximity to Emily, Daniel, and the grandchildren. Yet long-term adaptability required flexibility. They discussed contingencies for downsizing further or relocating if unforeseen expenses arose. These decisions balanced emotional attachment to place with practical financial necessity, a recurring theme in American retirement experiences. Anthropological studies reveal that attachment to familiar spaces often complicates pragmatic choices, reflecting the tension between memory, identity, and security. Investment strategy remained a daily focus. Mark diversified assets, balancing equities, bonds, and conservative funds while factoring in inflation and market volatility. Each decision was deliberate, grounded in both historical data and predictive modeling. Karen monitored updates on Social Security, tax law changes, and potential policy shifts. Their approach combined vigilance, adaptability, and discipline, essential elements in navigating the unpredictable landscape of modern retirement. Culturally, the Johnsons' experience reflected broader societal shifts. The ideal of retirement as a period of guaranteed leisure has been replaced by a nuanced reality. It is now a phase of continuous engagement, financial management, and adaptability. Families must navigate structural inequities, healthcare inflation, and market risk while preserving emotional well-being and intergenerational cohesion. The Johnsons embodied this reality, demonstrating resilience, planning, and emotional intelligence as essential tools in shaping a sustainable retirement. Emily proposed exploring supplemental income for her parents through small entrepreneurial ventures. Karen and Mark debated the idea, weighing potential benefits against physical and emotional energy. They ultimately considered flexible, low-stress projects that would contribute modestly to income while maintaining quality of life. The decision reflected a core principle: retirement is not simply about accumulation, but about creating sustainable systems that balance finances, health, and personal fulfillment. Financial stress management became a central focus. Karen and Mark incorporated mindfulness practices, journaling, and reflective conversations to address emotional strain. Studies suggest that financial stress can exacerbate health problems, reduce decision-making capacity, and affect family dynamics. By integrating psychological resilience into planning, the Johnsons mitigated risk not only financially, but also emotionally, a holistic approach that underscored the complexity of modern retirement. Cinematically, the family scenes highlighted both challenge and intimacy. Late evenings, with lamps casting soft light over spreadsheets and documents, became emblematic of disciplined planning. The quiet engagement of Emily and Daniel, assisting with research and documentation, added depth to the narrative, illustrating the subtleties of intergenerational cooperation. Outside, spring blossoms hinted at renewal, juxtaposing natural continuity with the structured, deliberate human effort unfolding indoors. Policy awareness remained critical. Karen and Mark monitored Social Security adjustments, healthcare legislation, and potential tax implications. Even minor policy changes could significantly impact projections and lifestyle. By staying informed, the Johnsons transformed uncertainty into preparedness, highlighting the importance of engagement with broader systemic structures that influence retirement outcomes. The family also reflected on legacy and values. Conversations centered on not just financial security, but the transmission of knowledge, resilience, and priorities to the next generation. Emily and Daniel learned not only about money, but about decision-making, adaptability, and problem-solving. This focus on values reinforced family cohesion, provided emotional clarity, and created a foundation for sustainable long-term planning beyond financial calculations. By mid-spring, the Johnsons' efforts had begun to coalesce into a sustainable rhythm. Downsizing, supplemental income, diversified investments, healthcare planning, and intergenerational collaboration created a layered safety net. Emotional resilience and mindfulness practices complemented financial strategies, forming a holistic framework for navigating uncertainty. While absolute security remained unattainable, proactive planning transformed risk into manageable variables. The Johnsons' experience highlights systemic inequities in American retirement. Despite decades of discipline, education, and savings, families remain vulnerable to market fluctuations, healthcare inflation, and policy shifts. Their journey underscores the importance of vigilance, adaptability, and intergenerational engagement, a template increasingly relevant to millions navigating similar circumstances. Cinematically, the narrative captured moments of quiet triumph: Karen and Mark sharing a cup of tea after updating finances, Emily playing with her children nearby, Daniel contributing ideas for household budgeting. These domestic vignettes illustrated a life calibrated to balance security, emotional well-being, and family cohesion, a nuanced portrait of resilience and adaptation in contemporary American retirement. By the conclusion of Part 9, the Johnsons had internalized critical lessons. Retirement is less a destination than an ongoing process, requiring vigilance, adaptability, and a balance between financial strategy and emotional resilience. Their story emphasized the interplay between personal choices, systemic factors, and intergenerational responsibility, reflecting the broader American experience in a detailed, humanized narrative. Late spring brought longer days and a sense of tentative optimism to Ohio. Yet for the Johnsons, optimism was tempered by practical concerns. The process of retirement, as they had discovered, required constant adjustment. Life rarely followed projections perfectly, and even meticulous planning could be disrupted by unforeseen events. Karen and Mark had learned that flexibility was just as vital as discipline, and that resilience depended on both financial strategy and emotional preparation. One morning, Karen discovered a minor anomaly in her blood work. While not immediately alarming, it signaled potential complications requiring monitoring and, possibly, additional treatment. The couple immediately recalculated potential medical expenses, reviewing insurance coverage and projected out-of-pocket costs. The scene was quietly tense, papers and medical documents spread across the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside spreadsheets, and the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Cinematically, the domestic intensity reflected the invisible pressure of health-related uncertainty that shapes modern retirement. Unexpected crises were not limited to healthcare. Mark's portfolio experienced a temporary market downturn, triggered by global economic turbulence. Even conservative investments, previously considered stable, saw modest declines. The Johnsons were reminded that systemic factors, interest rate fluctuations, inflation, and international events, could intrude upon personal planning with little warning. Financial analysts often emphasize the importance of contingency funds, diversified investments, and adaptive strategies. For the Johnsons, these were not abstractions, but essential tools for maintaining stability. The couple implemented lifestyle adjustments in response. Non-essential expenses were temporarily curtailed, utility usage optimized, and discretionary travel deferred. They also considered part-time consulting or tutoring to supplement potential income gaps, balancing financial necessity against the desire for leisure and well-being. These adjustments highlighted the delicate equilibrium required in modern retirement, balancing comfort, security, and quality of life against uncertainty. Emily and Daniel continued to play an active role. Emily, managing childcare and work responsibilities, assisted in organizing documents and researching policy changes, while Daniel provided insights on market fluctuations and potential tax strategies. Their involvement underscored a critical theme: contemporary retirement is not an isolated endeavor, but an intergenerational collaboration shaped by shared responsibility, knowledge transfer, and emotional support. Culturally, the Johnsons' experience reflected broader social dynamics. Whereas older generations often relied on defined pensions and more predictable social safety nets, contemporary retirees navigate a complex interplay of market dependence, healthcare costs, and policy uncertainty. The Johnsons embodied the adaptive strategies increasingly necessary for middle-class Americans: diversification, frugal living, supplemental income, and proactive risk management. Their story illuminated the invisible labor underpinning retirement stability, often overlooked in public narratives that emphasize leisure and reward. Healthcare planning remained a priority. Karen scheduled preventive screenings and monitored lifestyle adjustments to mitigate potential complications. Mark explored additional insurance options and evaluated home-based care contingencies. Each decision was informed by both financial and emotional considerations, highlighting the holistic nature of effective retirement planning. Cinematically, late afternoons were spent reviewing policies, balancing spreadsheets, and reflecting on potential scenarios, a quiet but intense visualization of invisible work that sustained security. The couple also reconsidered housing arrangements. While their smaller home reduced financial burdens, they evaluated proximity to community services, access to healthcare facilities, and the possibility of cohabitation with family members if needs changed. These deliberations reflected a nuanced understanding: stability was not simply a matter of savings, but of strategic placement, accessibility, and social support networks. Anthropological research indicates that aging in place, combined with family and community engagement, significantly improves both physical and emotional well-being. Financial literacy remains central to adaptation. Karen attended workshops on risk management, Mark monitored macroeconomic indicators, and both maintained an ongoing dialogue with Paul Hawkins. The cinematic imagery of focused evenings, lamps casting warm light over documents, quiet streets outside, and the couple's concentrated expressions, emphasized the depth of engagement required for effective planning. Their diligence demonstrated that financial security in modern retirement is an active process, demanding ongoing attention rather than passive accumulation. Unexpected social events also tested resilience. A close neighbor experienced a medical emergency, prompting Karen and Mark to confront potential scenarios involving their own friends and community. Observing these challenges reinforced the importance of social networks, emergency planning, and emotional readiness. Retirement, they realized, was intertwined with broader societal factors, community health, systemic accessibility, and cultural norms that shape aging experiences. By midsummer, the Johnsons had established a rhythm of adaptation. Budget reviews, healthcare monitoring, and contingency planning became regular household practices. Emotional resilience was cultivated through reflection, journaling, and family conversations. Emily and Daniel's involvement ensured continuity, practical support, and shared responsibility. Together, the family demonstrated that modern retirement was not a passive stage of life, but an active negotiation between personal agency, systemic constraints, and intergenerational collaboration. Cinematically, the domestic space transformed into a nexus of planning and reflection. Early morning light illuminated spreadsheets and medical forms, evenings were marked by quiet discussions over tea. The home became a space where the intersection of financial, emotional, and social dimensions of retirement played out daily. These visual cues underscored the ongoing nature of preparation, the integration of family, and the subtle tension between planning and unpredictability. Social reflections emerged as a central theme. The Johnsons recognized that their struggles were not isolated, but mirrored the experiences of millions of Americans navigating similar challenges. Rising healthcare costs, market volatility, housing pressures, and policy uncertainty created a collective anxiety among retirees. The family's adaptive strategies, prudent planning, diversification, supplemental income, and intergenerational collaboration, illustrated viable pathways through these structural challenges. By late summer, the Johnsons had also embraced lifestyle modifications aimed at sustainability and well-being. Karen focused on nutrition, exercise, and preventive care, while Mark incorporated mindfulness practices to manage stress. Together, they balanced practicality with quality of life, demonstrating that resilience in retirement involves both financial prudence and personal health management. These adjustments highlighted a holistic approach, integrating economic strategy, emotional stability, and physical well-being, a model increasingly relevant to contemporary retirees. Cinematically, the narrative concluded with quiet vignettes, Karen organizing medications and policy documents, Mark reviewing market trends, Emily and Daniel assisting with calculations, and grandchildren playing in the yard. These scenes reflected the intricate interplay of family, planning, and daily life, providing a textured, humanized portrait of modern American retirement. By the conclusion of Part 10, the Johnsons had internalized several critical principles. Retirement requires ongoing adaptation, financial strategies must be dynamic, healthcare and emotional resilience are inseparable from financial security, and intergenerational engagement is essential for sustainable outcomes. Their story emphasized the human dimension of retirement, how systemic pressures, personal choices, and family collaboration intersect to shape lived experience. Ultimately, the Johnsons exemplified a reality increasingly common in the United States. Retirement is not a static reward for decades of labor, but a continuous negotiation requiring foresight, flexibility, and emotional endurance. Their journey highlighted the invisible labor, strategic planning, and relational engagement that define stability and fulfillment in later life, providing a cinematic and deeply human reflection of contemporary American retirement. As summer waned and autumn approached, the Johnsons settled into a rhythm that blended careful planning, disciplined adjustment, and quiet resilience. Their smaller home, meticulously organized finances, and proactive healthcare measures had begun to produce tangible results. The sense of unease that had characterized early retirement planning had eased, replaced by a measured confidence rooted in preparation, adaptability, and intergenerational collaboration. Karen and Mark reviewed their investment portfolio, noting that diversification and conservative withdrawals had protected them from market turbulence. While no plan was impervious to economic fluctuations, they had mitigated the most severe risks. The cinematic scene unfolded in the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through frost-stained windows, spreadsheets and investment statements spread across the kitchen table. Their focus, concentration, and quiet satisfaction reflected the human labor underlying financial security, a labor invisible to the casual observer but central to sustainable retirement. Emily and Daniel contributed actively, ensuring that family support remained a tangible force. Emily balanced childcare with financial tracking, while Daniel provided insights into market trends and policy changes. Their involvement highlighted a broader truth: contemporary retirement is rarely an isolated endeavor. Instead, it is interwoven with the knowledge, cooperation, and engagement of multiple generations. Studies show that families practicing intergenerational financial planning experience reduced stress and improved long-term outcomes, a dynamic the Johnsons had embraced fully. Healthcare planning also bore fruit. Regular screenings, proactive management of chronic conditions, and preventive lifestyle adjustments had prevented minor issues from escalating into major crises. Supplemental insurance and carefully calculated long-term care contingencies ensured that any unexpected medical expenses could be absorbed without destabilizing the family's broader financial structure. The narrative, cinematic in its depiction, captured Karen updating records at the kitchen table while Mark calculated projected expenses, ordinary domestic acts that reflected extraordinary diligence. Yet the Johnsons remained acutely aware of the broader financial landscape. Systemic vulnerabilities persisted, Social Security reforms remained under discussion, healthcare costs continued to rise nationally, and market volatility threatened future projections. Their personal resilience provided a buffer, but it could not shield them entirely from structural forces beyond their control. This dual awareness, confidence tempered by humility, defined the emotional tenor of their ongoing retirement journey. Culturally, their experience reflected a shift in American retirement norms. Whereas prior generations often relied on defined benefit pensions and relatively predictable social safety nets, the Johnsons navigated a landscape characterized by individual responsibility, market exposure, and policy uncertainty. The family's experience highlighted the growing importance of financial literacy, strategic planning, and adaptive resilience in securing a stable and dignified retirement. Cinematic imagery reinforced this point. Quiet domestic spaces transformed into hubs of planning, reflection, and calculated action, visually representing the often invisible labor underpinning financial stability. Unexpected crises continued to test their preparation. A neighbor's sudden medical emergency reminded Karen and Mark of the unpredictable nature of aging, community, and personal health. The family's proactive strategies, emergency funds, supplemental insurance, and intergenerational support, provided both practical and psychological reassurance. These experiences underscored the necessity of integrating contingency planning into everyday life, transforming abstract risk into manageable scenarios. The Johnsons also revisited lifestyle adjustments. Travel plans were moderated, discretionary spending evaluated, and household operations optimized for efficiency. These decisions reflected a philosophy that has emerged across middle-class American households: quality of life is preserved not through excess, but through deliberate prioritization, strategic allocation of resources, and flexibility in response to evolving circumstances. Anthropological research confirms that such adaptive strategies are increasingly critical in navigating retirement, particularly amid structural inequities in wealth distribution, healthcare access, and policy stability. Financial literacy remained central. Karen attended workshops on risk management and healthcare optimization, while Mark monitored macroeconomic indicators and maintained ongoing dialogue with Paul Hawkins. Their sustained engagement transformed knowledge into actionable strategy, ensuring that decisions were informed rather than reactive. Cinematic depictions of evenings spent reviewing documents, laptops aglow, and the subtle cadence of pens on paper emphasized the continuous, disciplined effort required to maintain stability. Generational perspectives remained a key theme. Emily and Daniel absorbed not only practical knowledge about finance and healthcare, but also lessons in adaptability, emotional resilience, and problem-solving. These insights, transmitted through conversation, shared decision-making, and active participation, formed a critical component of family legacy, equipping the next generation to navigate similar challenges. The narrative emphasized the holistic nature of contemporary retirement planning, intergenerational collaboration, financial foresight, and emotional intelligence were inseparable elements of long-term security. As autumn progressed, Karen and Mark reflected on their journey. The adjustments, compromises, and disciplined efforts had yielded measurable benefits, reduced financial stress, controlled healthcare costs, and the ability to maintain desired quality of life. Yet clarity emerged not only through results, but also through awareness of ongoing vulnerabilities. Economic instability, policy shifts, and systemic inequities remained realities that could not be fully mitigated, highlighting the balance between agency and uncertainty inherent in contemporary American retirement. Cinematically, their homes served as a microcosm of broader social dynamics. Papers organized on tables, laptops displaying investment dashboards, family photographs, and medical records created a layered visual narrative. Each element represented both preparation and lived experience, the integration of domestic life, financial management, and emotional resilience. The scene underscored a central lesson: sustainable retirement is not defined solely by savings or income, but by the integration of planning, adaptation, and relational engagement. Policy awareness remained essential. Karen and Mark closely monitored Social Security reforms, Medicare changes, and potential tax legislation. Each adjustment, however minor, could influence long-term projections, emphasizing the ongoing negotiation between personal agency and systemic structures. Their proactive engagement demonstrated that while individuals cannot control macroeconomic and policy factors, informed vigilance significantly enhances resilience and strategic decision-making. The Johnsons also reflected on societal inequities. Despite decades of diligent work, disciplined saving, and careful planning, they recognized that their relative stability was still contingent upon structural factors beyond their control. Rising healthcare costs, housing disparities, and market volatility illustrated the systemic challenges confronting millions of middle-class Americans. Their story highlighted both the importance of personal adaptation and the broader societal context in which retirement occurs. By late autumn, the Johnsons had established a framework for sustainable living. Downsizing, diversified investments, supplemental income, healthcare planning, and intergenerational collaboration formed a multi-layered safety net. Emotional resilience, mindfulness practices, and deliberate lifestyle adjustments complemented these practical strategies. The cumulative effect was stability, not absolute security, but sufficient control over daily life to preserve dignity, autonomy, and family cohesion. Cinematically, the season's transition mirrored the narrative arc. Golden leaves fell outside frost-laden windows, while inside, quiet reflection, organized documentation, and familial cooperation conveyed both progress and vigilance. These domestic vignettes captured the nuanced, often invisible work underlying modern retirement, visually reinforcing the broader themes of preparation, adaptation, and resilience. By the conclusion of Part 11, the Johnsons had internalized critical lessons. Retirement is an ongoing negotiation, not a fixed endpoint. Financial strategy must be paired with emotional and relational resilience, and intergenerational engagement strengthens both practical and psychological security. Their journey illuminated the interplay between personal choice, systemic context, and adaptive planning, providing a humanized, cinematic reflection of contemporary American retirement. Ultimately, the Johnsons exemplified a reality increasingly common in the United States: the pursuit of a secure, dignified retirement is less about inevitability and more about navigation. It requires informed vigilance, strategic flexibility, emotional fortitude, and relational engagement. Their story serves as both a practical guide and a reflective portrait of the invisible, sustained labor required to manage uncertainty, preserve quality of life, and foster intergenerational continuity in the modern American landscape. Winter's return brought with it a soft hush over Ohio, snow settling lightly on rooftops and streets. Inside the Johnson household, the atmosphere was one of quiet reflection rather than anxiety. Karen and Mark had navigated years of planning, adaptation, and strategic decision-making. The journey had been arduous, marked by financial uncertainty, healthcare considerations, market volatility, and the emotional labor inherent in securing a sustainable retirement. Yet now, they possessed a clearer sense of control, a tangible stability built upon resilience, discipline, and intergenerational collaboration. The kitchen table, once cluttered with spreadsheets, medical forms, and insurance policies, had become a symbol of progress. Karen sipped tea as she reviewed the year's finances, noting how careful budgeting and strategic investments had buffered them against unexpected expenses. Mark updated projections for potential healthcare costs and supplemental income, confident that the layers of preparation they had built, emergency funds, diversified portfolios, and part-time engagements, were sufficient to navigate foreseeable challenges. Cinematically, the soft glow of afternoon light illuminated a domestic space transformed by diligence, foresight, and emotional labor. Emily and Daniel remained actively involved, reflecting the essential role of intergenerational collaboration in modern retirement. Emily provided practical assistance and emotional support, ensuring her parents' planning remained grounded in real-world realities, while Daniel contributed strategic insights, from market trends to policy updates. Their involvement highlighted a broader truth: sustainable retirement is rarely achieved in isolation. Instead, it is an interwoven endeavor, dependent on family cohesion, knowledge sharing, and shared responsibility. Studies indicate that families who actively engage in multi-generational financial planning not only improve outcomes but also reduce stress and foster long-term resilience. Healthcare continued to be a central consideration. Karen maintained preventive screenings and managed lifestyle adjustments to mitigate potential complications. Mark monitored supplemental insurance policies and projected expenses for long-term care contingencies. Their proactive approach reflected a key lesson: effective retirement planning is holistic, integrating financial prudence, healthcare preparedness, and emotional resilience. Cinematically, the domestic space, papers organized neatly, laptops displaying projections, sunlight glinting on documents, visualized the quiet but intense labor underpinning security and stability. Unexpected crises, while less frequent, still tested their preparation. Minor medical alerts, market fluctuations, and neighborhood emergencies reminded the family that uncertainty is an inherent part of life. Yet the Johnsons had developed strategies to respond effectively: emergency funds, supplemental income, intergenerational support, and deliberate planning. These mechanisms converted anxiety into manageable variables, demonstrating the power of foresight, preparation, and emotional composure. The Johnsons had also refined lifestyle adjustments that balanced practicality with fulfillment. Downsizing to a smaller home reduced financial strain, while proximity to family and community services ensured support and engagement. Travel, hobbies, and social participation were deliberately calibrated, providing joy and enrichment without compromising stability. Anthropological research confirms that such intentional prioritization, balancing quality of life against financial and health realities, is a critical determinant of satisfaction and resilience in retirement. Financial literacy remained a cornerstone of their journey. Karen attended workshops on risk management and healthcare optimization, while Mark maintained continuous engagement with market analysis and policy developments. Their discipline transformed knowledge into actionable strategy, ensuring that decisions were informed, deliberate, and adaptive. Cinematic imagery of evenings spent reviewing documents, the soft hum of a laptop, and the quiet presence of family reinforced the narrative of sustained effort required to navigate complex economic and social landscapes. Generational engagement emerged as a defining feature of the Johnsons' experience. Beyond financial oversight, Emily and Daniel absorbed lessons in adaptability, problem-solving, and emotional resilience. These insights extended the family's legacy beyond material wealth, equipping the next generation with the tools to navigate uncertainty. This intergenerational transfer of knowledge underscored a profound truth: retirement security encompasses not only finances but relational intelligence, emotional composure, and strategic foresight. Policy awareness remained integral. Karen and Mark tracked potential Social Security reforms, healthcare legislation, and tax policy adjustments. Even minor changes could influence projections and lifestyle decisions, highlighting the delicate interplay between personal agency and systemic forces. By maintaining vigilance, the family mitigated risk while remaining adaptable, a central lesson for contemporary retirees navigating an increasingly complex structural landscape. Systemic inequities were ever present. Despite decades of disciplined saving, careful planning, and prudent financial behavior, the Johnsons were still subject to vulnerabilities inherent in the broader economic system: rising healthcare costs, housing disparities, market volatility, and policy shifts. Their journey illustrated the dual reality of modern retirement. Personal agency is powerful, yet always constrained by structural factors beyond one's control. Cinematically, this tension was captured in domestic spaces filled with careful planning, juxtaposed against the unpredictable rhythms of the world outside. By midwinter, the Johnsons had achieved a balance between preparation and adaptability. Emergency funds, diversified investments, supplemental income, healthcare contingencies, and intergenerational collaboration formed a layered safety net. Emotional resilience practices, mindfulness, reflection, and open dialogue complemented practical strategies. While absolute security remained elusive, the family had created stability sufficient to preserve dignity, autonomy, and quality of life. The cumulative effect of years of disciplined effort was palpable. Domestic routines, once dominated by anxiety and uncertainty, now reflected a calm, structured rhythm. Karen and Mark moved through their days with purpose, integrating planning with daily life rather than allowing uncertainty to dominate it. Emily and Daniel provided ongoing support, ensuring continuity, shared responsibility, and a buffer against both practical and emotional challenges. Cinematically, these quiet domestic vignettes illustrated a life calibrated for resilience, a portrait of stability achieved through effort, insight, and collaboration. Reflection deepened as the Johnsons considered broader lessons. Retirement is less a finite milestone than a continuous negotiation. It demands vigilance, adaptability, emotional intelligence, and intergenerational cooperation. Financial strategy must be integrated with healthcare preparedness, lifestyle adjustments, and contingency planning. Socially and culturally, the experience highlighted the evolution of American retirement, from a largely predictable stage supported by pensions and government structures to a dynamic, individualized, and complex phase requiring constant engagement. The family also recognized the importance of perspective. While their journey had been marked by challenges, the measures they had taken, downsizing, supplemental income, diversified investments, healthcare planning, intergenerational collaboration, had cultivated both security and meaning. The cinematic imagery of shared meals, quiet evenings reviewing documents, and seasonal transitions outside the home reinforced the intimate, humanized dimensions of retirement planning. These moments illustrated that the pursuit of stability is as much emotional and relational as it is financial. By the conclusion of Part 12, the Johnsons' journey provided a reflective closure that resonated both personally and universally. They had navigated structural vulnerabilities, market unpredictability, healthcare costs, and emotional strain. Through proactive planning, disciplined strategy, and intergenerational engagement, they achieved a nuanced, sustainable version of retirement. Their story underscored the broader truth: in modern America, securing a dignified retirement is less about entitlement and more about informed action, resilience, and relational intelligence. The Johnsons' experience serves as a cinematic and humanized case study. Every spreadsheet, policy document, conversation with Emily and Daniel, and careful lifestyle adjustment represented deliberate labor against uncertainty. The narrative, visualized through domestic intimacy and quiet reflection, demonstrated that retirement stability is a product of both personal discipline and awareness of structural forces. Emotional, financial, and relational intelligence are inseparable components of this labor. Ultimately, the Johnsons embodied a reality increasingly common in contemporary America: retirement is an ongoing negotiation, shaped by personal choices, systemic factors, and intergenerational cooperation. Their journey illustrated that security is neither guaranteed nor static; it is earned, maintained, and adapted over time. The cinematic imagery of domestic focus, seasonal change, and familial engagement provided a tangible, humanized lens into the often invisible labor that underpins retirement resilience. As snow fell lightly outside their home, Karen and Mark sat together, reflecting on the path they had traversed. They had faced uncertainty, adapted to systemic challenges, and integrated intergenerational support. Their experience illuminated a broader societal lesson: while retirement in modern America is fraught with complexity, informed preparation, adaptability, and relational engagement can create stability, dignity, and fulfillment. Their story closes not with certainty, but with resilience, awareness, and intentionality, an ongoing testament to the labor, insight, and collaboration that define contemporary American retirement. As the Johnson story draws to a close, one thing becomes clear: retirement is not a static destination, but an ongoing journey, a delicate balance between preparation, adaptation, and resilience. Karen and Mark's experience shows that financial security, health, and emotional well-being are deeply interconnected. Planning, thoughtful decision-making, and intergenerational collaboration do not guarantee certainty, but they create a framework that allows families to navigate challenges with dignity and confidence. Their story also reflects a broader reality in modern America. Millions of families face rising healthcare costs, market volatility, housing pressures, and policy uncertainties. Retirement is no longer a guaranteed reward for decades of hard work; it's a complex negotiation requiring both strategy and adaptability. Yet the Johnsons demonstrate that through knowledge, careful planning, and emotional intelligence, it's possible to turn uncertainty into manageable, actionable steps. The quiet moments, reviewing spreadsheets at the kitchen table, coordinating with adult children, adjusting lifestyle choices, or simply reflecting on the year's progress, illustrate a profound truth: the invisible labor behind retirement stability is as much emotional as it is financial. It is the diligence, the conversations, the decisions, and the adjustments made day after day that build a secure, meaningful, and resilient life after work. If there's one takeaway from their journey, it's this: your retirement future depends on awareness, action, and preparation. Start early, engage your family, diversify your strategies, and stay informed about both your personal finances and the broader systems that impact them. It's never too late to take control, make adjustments, and create a plan that works for your unique circumstances. If you found the Johnsons' journey insightful, don't forget to like this video to show your support, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the realities behind modern financial life. Share your thoughts in the comments. What strategies do you think are essential for a secure retirement? Your experience might inspire someone else taking the same journey. Remember, retirement isn't just about numbers. It's about choices, priorities, and resilience, the quiet, thoughtful work that allows families like the Johnsons to live with dignity, security, and hope.